Back in the day, I was absolutely obsessed with Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Now it's almost 15 years old, I wanted to see if I was looking at it through rose-tinted glasses, and also see how well it holds up in 2024. This review will include some Brotherhood and AC2 story spoilers, but with that being said, let's just jump straight on into it. Now, Brotherhood is a true sequel and picks up the story right from where we left off in AC2, in our fight against the Pope Rodrigo Borgia. I still love, by the way, that we actually fought the literal Pope, and whoever decided on that is a genius. Before we actually get going with any gameplay though, the game teases us the end of Brotherhood's story in a really cool cutscene, just grabbing your attention the second it gets going. But we quickly head back to the auditory villa with the Apple of Eden in hand, meet some familiar faces, and our story starts off positive, with Ezio believing that his battle is already won. He does get a quick scolding from all of his family and friends about why on earth he didn't kill Rodrigo, but Ezio kinda shrugs this off, stating that there was no need, he was already beaten. I also found it hilarious that the game reminds us instantly that Ezio is a true horn dog, looking to put his end away the second he gets home. We're actually treated to a rather saucy little sex scene that I'd forgotten about as well. But then we are thrown straight into the action as Ezio's family home is suddenly under siege by the Borgia armies. We get to enjoy some fun cannon fire, have a cool moment where you're riding a horse, the city is crashing all around you, and Ezio's famed armour of Altair is also caught in the crossfire, which much to many players' dismay, we're now forced to continue our gameplay with nothing. Personally, I didn't mind this, as it is a brand new game, it wouldn't make sense to be OP right from the beginning, but I do get it as well. And then we are introduced to one of my favourite villains of the series, Rodrigo's son, Cesare Borgia. He has a really great introduction, literally blowing down our door, destroying our home, and executing our Uncle Mario, a character we all got to know in AC2, right in front of our eyes. As a villain, Cesare truly is fantastic. Whilst his father was more pragmatic or level-headed, Cesare is a full-on madman, with his emotions always bubbling away at the surface. He's also quite a disgusting person as well, as Brotherhood strongly implies that Cesare wants to, or already has, been poking his own sister. Brotherhood was actually released 1 year before Game of Thrones, by the way, so whilst most of us are, let's say, familiar with the concept of incest, at the time many of us wouldn't even have been aware that this was a thing. He even goes one step further, and this is another nod to Game of Thrones, eventually murdering his own father with a literal apple. The nuance, by the way, is not lost on me here. I have to give a big shout out to the voice actor for Cesare, who whilst as a character his heinous deeds really shine, it's a voice actor called Andreas Apergis who adds to this greatly. Whilst familiar to AC2, Cesare gives us another strong revenge premise and a really strong overall start to the game, which then leads us in heading to Rome, building the Assassin's Brotherhood to full power, with the end goal of taking over the Borgia and their leader Cesare. That's the entire story in a nutshell. Whilst Ezio is still a horny assassin, we really do see change in him compared to AC2. He matures massively, taking on the leadership role with his friends, family and the Brotherhood, with everyone now looking towards him for their answers. We went through some pretty serious shit in AC2, and whilst that game was very much his origin story, it culminated in creating the absolute master assassin and Ezio Auditore at his finest. There were also a lot of the side characters from AC2 making a comeback, all of them actually being integral to the narrative too, rather than being characters you'd work with a couple times and then just forget about. They also further add to Ezio's maturity too, as he's forced to handle each of them with care, whether that's them being suspicious of one another or angry that Ezio didn't finish off Rodrigo. In particular, the subplot of Machiavelli maybe being a spy I thought was done really well. The story too, in parts, were actually pretty brutal. Not just losing Mario in the beginning, but there was one scene where these guys slit a prostitute's throat right in front of us whilst laughing. It totally caught me off guard at the time. That's not to say that our story is perfect though. I felt like our previous baddie Rodrigo was somewhat underutilised, although whilst I do appreciate he shouldn't be such a threat again as we already beat him, I also felt that he didn't really get enough screen time. Brotherhood also follows the same narrative as most AC games too. It starts with a loved one dying, hitting rock bottom, and then has our protagonist kill all of the characters surrounding our villain, culminating in one final showdown. This isn't a complaint, by the way, it's just not anything new. Some also argue that the main story is too short, lasting around 12 to 15 hours, and the ending I also found a little strange as there's a big time jump to our fight with Cesare, but no reason as to why. It's difficult to review an old game without commenting on the graphics, where there is one scene in a brothel where Ezio states that Claudia isn't teaching her whores much, and it pans to an ineligible chalkboard. In general though, I am a big fan of Brotherhood's story, the dialogue is pretty slick, our characters are well rounded, Ezio is at his finest, and our villain Cesare is a real son of a bitch for you to really hate. Overall, taking the fight to the Templars, liberating the city and building up the Assassin's Brotherhood is really enjoyable, and I'm pleased to say, so is the modern day. Let's get this out of the way by saying that for most of the modern day AC storylines, I don't like them. They're confusing, boring, and often I just find myself wishing to be back in the Animus. But that only applies to the modern day from AC3 onwards, and Brotherhood is probably tied with AC3 for first place. The modern day is way more integrated with Ezio's storyline, explaining why you have to play the memories in order, how the Animus works, etc. Later games have none of that. What you do in the Animus actually shapes the modern day storyline. You go into the Animus, you gather information and locations for your modern day team, and then you go to those same locations and explore them in the modern day. Our first mission sees us reliving memories and seeing different ghosts, which was really cool, with these few missions largely being puzzles for you and your best friend Lucy to overcome, which were actually pretty satisfying and a bit of a challenge. The big complaint Brotherhood's modern day gets though is that Lucy's death feels very out of place, and that is with good reason. In Brotherhood, the reason Desmond kills Lucy is because she was a triple agent. She was originally an assassin who infiltrated the Templars to spy on them, but then joined the Templars and infiltrated the Assassins while pretending she was still on their side. In the real world, it's because Kristen Bell wanted more royalties, so Ubisoft decided to kill Lucy off instead of pay Kristen, so Lucy was probably not planned to be a Templar in the beginning.
Holy motherforking shirt balls.
Either way though, this ending is unexpected, but it doesn't spoil my enjoyment of our modern day storyline at all. So just to clarify, I am playing and capturing Brotherhood on my PC, and this is still an original copy of the game, and not the slightly graphically improved copy of the game from the Ezio collection, as they never actually released that for PC. When reading up about this though, I heard that if you have all of the graphics on max on PC, you'll actually trump the Ezio collection graphics anyway, so no problems there. Do let me know if I'm talking complete gibberish, as this is just what I've read on Reddit. But on my version of the game, which on average runs at a cool 100 to 130 FPS, I have to say graphically Brotherhood holds up really well. It is absolutely nuts that I'm playing a game that is almost 15 years old and still getting incredibly detailed buildings or these amazing shots of our city. Brotherhood, despite only being released almost exactly 1 year after AC2, was a big step up graphically, with 15th century Rome in my opinion easily being one of the best settings of the entire franchise. Rome is one of the most iconic cities in the world, and in Brotherhood, we're able to scale massive landmarks like the Pantheon or Colosseum, or explore the close-knit streets or ruins in its outskirts. Whilst the inner city is incredibly detailed and constantly beautiful to look at, the outer city is somewhat barren and empty. I also get that it makes sense for the outer areas of Rome to obviously not be as built up, but I think the graphic restrictions of the time can make it all look very 2D and wooden. Another small negative is the fact that particularly in the outskirts of the city, you can see more textures and buildings spawning in as you're travelling. Again though, this is a constraint of the time. But you can explore this city in a variety of ways, whether that's across the rooftops, which I'm pleased to say for a large portion of Rome you won't need to step on the ground, on horseback, which you'll definitely need if you're exploring the outskirts, or even by gondola, which realistically you probably won't find yourself doing. Rome is also full of NPCs too, all going about their daily business, be that different workers, merchants, beggars, people arguing, riding horses, shopping, the list goes on. For a game this old, I was really impressed by how many NPCs I could see at one time. Now Brotherhood, just like AC2, also includes fast travel, implemented in fast travel tunnels all over the map, which once purchasing or renovating, allow you to travel to other tunnel points. Whilst I didn't find myself using this too much, if you do have to go from one end of the map to the other side, they are definitely worth having. Some complaints about Rome and exploration is that the map is too small with not enough content within it, as well as there being too much open space. Whilst I can agree on the open space comments, which is a common complaint about the RPG games of Assassin's Creed, there is definitely more than enough content within it. Outside of the main and side objectives, we have assassination missions, courtesan, mercenaries or thieves guild missions, Borgia flags scattered around the map, Leonardo and his war machine missions, the Romulus tomb challenges, guild challenges and shop quests, Templar hunts, and of course an assortment of flags, treasures and feathers to find, as well as other small NPC interactions. An interesting fact about our city of Rome is that initially it was designed to be part of AC2, however the city ended up becoming so massive they had to use it in the sequel. This is why the game was able to come out just a year later after the release of AC2, because they'd already started working on it. I think the reason why Rome in Brotherhood is so great is because the city aids to all of the gameplay. It is the perfect playground for the Assassin's Creed fantasy, being able to run across rooftops or stalk from above, or even spend time on the ground and sneak to your foe amidst a sea of crowds. Eventually, when you do head out of the city centre, the experience does become vastly different, and whilst I like exploring and travelling on horseback at times, the true joy of this game is spent in the heart of the city. The particular moment for me, which I'm pleased to say was almost as exciting as when I did it 15 years ago, was scaling that Colosseum, sinking across a huge viewpoint, and then doing a massive leap of faith like an absolute Assassin G. For the Assassin's Creed fantasy, it really doesn't get much better than Rome. Having gone from playing AC3 straight into playing Brotherhood, initially I found Brotherhood's combat a teeny bit complicated. There are a number of different options alongside your attack and parry, including dodge, grab, kick and counterkill. However, very quickly I realised that the majority of those options are kinda pointless, and you'll mostly find yourself adopting the counterkill method, occasionally kicking or grabbing an enemy whenever they're being stubborn. There is a big reason for this, and that's because of, and it's probably the biggest gameplay change added to Brotherhood from AC2, the new combo system. If you perform a successful counterkill, which when using my Xbox controller is holding RT and timing X on a parry, the next enemy can be killed instantly with a standard attack, and this rolls on and on and on until you take a hit. They even made the parry window longer in Brotherhood so you had more time to react, and whilst some people might consider Brotherhood's combat easy, which I definitely think it is, it feels utterly fantastic. But Ezio isn't just proficient in sword use either, and there are a lot of other weapons for you to purchase and pick up, including scimitars, spears, hammers, daggers, hidden guns, two-handed swords and more, even being able to just use your hidden blades if that's what you'd prefer. Equipping them, granted, can be a bit of a pain. You'll have to run back to the blacksmith each time you want to change your main weapon, but I suppose that does make sense in terms of where Ezio would actually be storing his weapons. Alongside the melee weapons, Ezio also has ranged weapons too, including throwing knives and a crossbow for stealth, which we'll talk about shortly, as well as a hidden gun. The gun Ezio carries is way quicker to shoot now than it was in AC2, and is actually useful now during combat, rather than in AC2 where it would take ages to line up a shot. It's still an automatic lock-on weapon, and you won't find yourself using it much, but I found it particularly useful when taking out those enemies on horseback. If you don't have any ammo though, you'll be pleased to know that you can even throw your weapons too, something we haven't seen in other AC games for years. The kill animations too, for all weapons, are super varied and brutal, and genuinely I can't express how satisfying it feels to be surrounded by multiple enemies, counter-attack and then take out every single one of them not just in a matter of seconds, but with such style and savageness. Whilst granted, a lot of the time you'll find yourself waiting for that moment to parry, you can also overwhelm your enemies by spamming the attack system, making any combat situation pretty quick, whereas in AC2, some fights never seem to end. They even have horse combat in Brotherhood, and although it's very simple and I wouldn't personally recommend using it, it's another addition to the game that fleshes it out and offers another dimension. The combat's biggest weakness though is probably the lack of enemy variety, where whilst you had smaller enemies, quicker enemies, heavier, slower enemies that pack bigger hits, they're largely all defeated in the same way, where even the biggest, most armoured brute will fall to that unstoppable combo system. Other negatives can be that starting combat can sometimes be a little awkward. Sometimes you'll find that you'll have to wait until enemies start attacking you before you can then fight back. I'm not sure if this is a bug or just how it was made, but occasionally there is an awkward pause before you engage. The Borgia tower leaders too, unlike any other enemy, can take a really stupidly long time to die, or they'll be on the floor, you'll be tapping the kill button, but Ezio just keeps kicking them again and again and again. Overall, whilst there is a lot of weapons for you to unlock, the combat is ultimately easy. Assassin's Creed games are made for the masses and average gamer after all, so you don't need to pay with your in-game coin and unlock gear if you don't want to. The only reason I try out new weapons is to see those fantastic kill animations. But ultimately, what makes the combat so satisfying in Brotherhood is the seamlessness of it all, and this point actually aids as to why AC3 is still my favourite combat, despite Brotherhood being so good. Combat which is smooth, responsive and beautiful with a variety of different kill animations is what makes it for me. It's not the complexity of it all, it's how it makes me feel whilst I'm doing it, and in Brotherhood you are a complete badass. Now obviously this game is called AC Brotherhood, and there was another massive addition to the game, the new ability to call in and send out your own assassins on missions. We're not the low-level assassin initiate we were in AC2, we're now the master leading others, utilising them in times most needed. This is a substantial part of the game, and there's a big emphasis on finding your assassin recruits, whom you'll need to save to bring into the fold, the aim being that when needed, you can call them to war to fight for you, as well as sending them out on contract missions to gain more XP and cash. And talking of gaining more XP, if you're enjoying this video so far, then help my channel level up by hitting that subscribe button. That was a super uncool way of asking, but hey, I just thought I'd change up how I do ask for subscribers. It really helps. The assassin recruits bring a whole new level of depth to the AC genre, whether you utilise them to take out a pesky crossbowman in the distance, or just to have them straight up batter enemies alongside you, is your choice, even adding some risk into the scenario as you might find your assassin brothers don't make it. Again, much like the new combo kill system, it makes the game a lot easier, but in my opinion it's probably the best new addition of the entire game, and something I wish they'd kept in every Assassin's Creed game ongoing. They're also really useful for stealth too, which we'll talk about now. Now stealth is a bit of an interesting one to me, as it's not so clear on whether it's just good or bad. Initially, when you start playing, you have your hidden blades and your throwing knives as tools, which can feel rather basic and difficult to use. The knives in particular have a very short range, and often I found Ezio would struggle to lock onto targets. But as time progresses and you start earning some money, you're able to buy a load of new gear, including a second hidden blade, a crossbow, smoke bombs and more, and stealth becomes way more enjoyable. Your crossbow is kinda your bread and butter in this game, and one weapon you're definitely going to want in your regular arsenal. This thing can take out any enemy from quite a fair distance, and can carry a max of 25 rounds, which feels like it never runs out. And if I'm honest, if anything the crossbow is kind of overpowered, but this doesn't detract from my enjoyment in any way. The smoke bombs, which you won't unlock until you buy a certain pouch, are really good for running away, or taking out a large group of guards without anyone realising, although I didn't find myself using them that much, because our crossbow is so great. Social stealth too is really good in Brotherhood and very easy for you to utilise. You can blend in with generic crowds by walking, standing and sitting alongside them, as well as hiring ladies of the night to walk alongside you, even directing them to distract guards. What makes stealth in Brotherhood though is our assassin recruits. It is so satisfying to have a bunch of your own assassins appear out of nowhere and kill everyone in sight, but even more gratifying is the Arrow Storm ability, where you'll hold LB and a mass of arrows from your assassins will take out large groups of enemies. This isn't unlimited, it will take some time to recharge, but it really does make you feel like you're living the Brotherhood trailer. Notoriety also exists in Brotherhood, so if you kill a certain amount of enemies and are spotted enough times doing so, your notoriety will rise until the guards will be after you 24/7. You can reduce your notoriety by ripping down posters, bribing local heralds, but the best way to do it is killing an enemy official, and the most satisfying as well. Initially, I kind of thought stealth was really basic, but there are quite a number of hidden mechanics within the stealth, like being able to throw 5 knives at once, assassinating someone from your own horse and onto theirs, and attracting enemies using dead bodies and more. A lot of the missions are clearly designed for stealth too, whether that's the mission where you have to tail a banker and then you're prompted to assassinate him by blending in with the locals at his party, or the mission where you have to infiltrate a prison and rescue Katarina, and the Leonardo missions in particular each have an opening moment of stealth too. That isn't to say though that stealth is perfect by any means. All of the Ezio games are missing a cover and crouch system, and it can feel a bit weird when you're trying to remain invisible, but Ezio is standing there loud and proud. And the running stealth takedowns in particular do break things for you immersion wise, as you'll run, jump and stab someone only for your entire hand to go right through them. Some people highlight the Ezio trilogy as if it's the pinnacle of stealth in Assassin's Creed, and it is good no doubt about it, but my personal favourite has to be AC Syndicate, and you can check out my review pinned in the description if you want to hear more about that. Overall though, stealth in Brotherhood was a good addition to the franchise, with the addition of the crossbow and the assassin recruit making it really enjoyable. And the parkour isn't half bad either. Some people revere parkour in the Ezio trilogy as being utter perfection and even better than Unity, which over time has grown to be so many people's favourite AC game, at least in terms of parkour anyway. As it had been a really long time since I'd played the older games, I was intrigued to see how well it would cope compared to the most recent AC Mirage. My first instinct with Brotherhood's parkour was that Rome is a parkour playground, and Ezio is really responsive. In fact, the biggest change the parkour made since AC2 is the speed of how Ezio climbs up walls and back ejects and side ejects. Sure, the outskirts of Rome aren't going to offer you anything to the same degree, but the centre will give you almost non-stop running rooftop action with a decent amount of parkour paths for you to follow. Climbing, particularly up large structures, is now more challenging and more like a puzzle, searching for ledges or grabbing points for you to go higher, and you'll experience this a lot during the Romulus layers, which are one of my highlights of the game. This adds more challenge than the recent AC games, where if you just run and point up, you'd be able to climb anywhere. As I said, climbing is actually a little faster than AC2, however it can feel slower in certain sections due to the type of structure you're actually climbing. This isn't a complaint, by the way. I actually quite like having to work out which way to go, and accept that, 50 feet up, you're not going to be able to just fly up like gravity doesn't exist. We still have a manual jump button, however Ezio will also jump if you're holding down sprint, so it's difficult to always know when to actually click jump, and there was also the later addition of the larger grab jump, allowing you to climb faster by jumping and grabbing ledges. This was also in AC2 without the specific glove needed that you'll get in Brotherhood from Leonardo, but I'm not really sure why this was hidden behind an in-game paywall. Perhaps they just wanted you to have something to work towards and keep you playing. Another addition is that Ezio can now propel himself onto roofs using rope lines, which you'll then see in every AC game onwards, as well as being able to jump to and from a horse, making for some excellent parkour fluidity. An aspect I also really like is that there is a genuine level of risk compared to future AC games. Whilst I enjoy AC3, Black Flag and Rogue, especially the tree parkour, it is way easier to make a mistake in Brotherhood and fall 50 feet to the ground. You also don't have anywhere near as much freedom as you do in the Ezio trilogy, and whilst Brotherhood does provide planned parkour routes, you can also improvise your own routes too, making you think about which direction to take, rather than it being blaringly obvious about which parkour path you have to follow. Overall, Parkour made minor improvements to the already enjoyable AC2, Ezio is responsive and quick moving, and Rome offers some terrific moments of parkour, whether on a pre-planned path or a route you make yourself. Personally, I still think Unity has the best parkour system, but Brotherhood is easily still one of the best parkour experiences you can have in any AC game. So far, we've covered almost every aspect of the game, except really how you're going to be spending most of your time. In terms of the gameplay loop and your main objective outside of the individual main missions, you're going to be spending a large portion of your time taking out Borgia strongholds. Throughout Rome, there are various towers and areas manned by masses of enemy troops, and within them, a Borgia leader you're tasked with taking out, and upon doing so, you have to climb up a tower to set fire to it, thus liberating the area from the Borgia and pulling it under Brotherhood control. I would say this whole liberating areas does somewhat become a bit repetitive. Perhaps they could have had more difficult areas or different missions to get rid of this Borgia presence, but overall it's a solid addition to the game and how you'll be spending a large chunk of your time. Not only does it give you the option of adding more assassins to the Brotherhood, but it also allows you to renovate shops in their area, which then gives you regular income. In fact, if you are looking to make a lot of money in this game, and there is quite a lot of gear for you to buy, this is easily the best way to do it. Talking of shops, you even have your sister run your own whorehouse, which I initially thought was how maybe Ezio would hire the ladies of the night for social stealth, but we actually still have to pay them regardless of our little side hustle. To be honest, I find the whole money system a little strange in Brotherhood. I need passive income like I'm some sort of property mogul, but I'm also a master assassin. I'm not hating on this entirely, it just seems somewhat out of place to me. A different way to earn some cash and level up your Brotherhood recruits is through a piece of side content which I call pigeon missions. These are actually Brotherhood contracts, and whilst they're a small part of the game, they're the best way to level up your assassins, sending groups of them off on missions to complete around the world. This is another strange mechanic as well in my opinion, as it's something you can't actually see for yourself, but I do appreciate the concept of your assassins doing different missions and getting stronger. And by the way, whilst they're on these missions, you won't be able to utilise them in-game either. Another aspect you'll find yourself taking part in are those infamous tailing missions, a lot of which take part from the main story and are introduced right at the beginning of the game. Tailing missions are somewhat controversial in Assassin's Creed, with many players finding them repetitive, and whilst that could be considered true, I'd argue in Brotherhood they're more enjoyable and less frequent than in a game like Black Flag. One of my favourite pieces of side content are the Legend of Romulus missions, which allow you to unlock the famous armour of Brutus and Dagger by exploring and gathering keys from the Romulus lairs. Whilst a lot of these missions are fun parkour puzzles, something the newer games do not have, and they can be really satisfying when you complete them, the Romulus lairs also provide some really enjoyable chases and moments of combat too, and genuinely feel like a part of the main game rather than an additional side objective. Another awesome piece of side content I haven't mentioned yet are the Leonardo missions, which are always totally different than your usual gameplay. Initially, you're tasked with locating a blueprint or gadget that the Borgia have forced Leonardo to make, often offering some fun stealth moments, before being thrust into some wacky machine to decimate the Borgia with. Whether you're being chased by cavalry and using a sort of giant crossbow, or taking down Borgia ships from a tiny little gondola, I found these to be a really nice change of pace, and just as enjoyable when I played them all back in 2010. One aspect I couldn't not mention is something that comes in the later stage of the game, where instead of using combat directly, you'll be able to use your Apple of Eden to turn your enemies against each other. Personally, I wasn't a massive fan of this. It's enjoyable for a short while, but I think this would have been better suited to just a single pivotal moment, rather than multiple missions, as it's ultimately just easy and negates your combat. A common mission we don't see so much in the later games are escort missions, where you basically protect an important figure throughout the streets of Rome, telling them to wait and follow at different moments until you get to your destination. These characters do have a set amount of health too, so if you're not careful, you could find they get taken out and you have to try again. I have to say, I found these to be pretty enjoyable, but they're not anything too crazy either. And of course, a lot of our time will be spent completing assassination missions, who'd have guessed it, be they infiltrating garrisons or buildings, or simply heading from target to target. Many of these also include chasing missions, where you have to chase down and parkour your way to an escaping victim, and believe me, some of these guys you're chasing are professional athletes, they're not always that easy to catch. Another issue is dependent on what mission you're taking part in, and if you fail, it could send you right back to the beginning again, cutscenes and all. It didn't happen too often, as I wouldn't say any main mission was too challenging, but if I do have to replay a mission, please do not make me rewatch the cutscene again and again, just give me a skip button. Although saying that, if you do want to replay a mission, you can now choose to do this simply by pausing the game, heading to the DNA and picking a past memory from a sequence you've played. This initially wasn't in AC2 and was a common complaint, so it's another win for Brotherhood in terms of actually listening to what the fans want from the previous game. Whilst a lot of the missions can be considered somewhat easy, the full synchronization objectives can sometimes be a real game changer. For example, for one mission I had to throw an enemy into some scaffolding, no problem there whatsoever. However, for another mission, I had to infiltrate and climb a building, the whole sequence of which takes around 20 minutes without being spotted. Believe me, this was basically impossible. If you are a bit of a completionist, it's likely that many of these side objectives absolutely enraged you, but for the more average gamer, you'll be pleased that this is all optional. Overall, some of the content in Brotherhood can feel a little rushed, as well as somewhat repetitive, particularly if you only stick to the main story. It's largely just tailing, assassination, or straight up combat missions. However, because it takes place within our incredible city, our missions mostly always end up to be super entertaining, and there wasn't a mission I ever felt like I was bored in. I think when you build a world that complements your actual gameplay mechanics, the objectives you're tasked with, even if mediocre, are overall fantastic because they're excuses for you to enjoy everything that's in front of you. This leads me on very nicely to our conclusion. So whilst we've covered a lot so far, there are still some aspects that I haven't managed to get around to yet, starting with the music. Having just played AC3, which by the way does also have a great soundtrack, it's used way less in the game than I would have liked. However, in Brotherhood, even doing relatively simple missions like riding alongside Machiavelli are exciting because the music makes it so. Almost the entirety of the game is backdrop to our fabulous composer Jesper Kyd and his medieval style music, fitting in so well to our ancient setting of Rome. Just take a quick listen. Another big thing I've not yet mentioned, and although it's unplayable now, was the game's multiplayer. There was a specific wanted mode which is a bit like a game of cat and mouse, where you're hunting players and also being hunted yourself, and you're also trying to blend in and act like an NPC, adding an actual degree of stealth to the game. The servers have sadly been long abandoned, but it remains a really incredible and quite original concept, and honestly, I was kinda gutted that I didn't have the opportunity to replay it. I will say as well, and perhaps this is because I'm playing on PC, was that the game did have its fair share of bugs, however all of them were largely minor. The biggest issue I found was that NPCs can sometimes just spawn in and out of nowhere or disappear, particularly during mid-fight, which obviously breaks things a little for you in terms of your immersion. To truly conclude though, should you play Assassin's Creed Brotherhood in 2024? Abso-bloody-lutely. Upon its release, one of the complaints, and this ties into Revelations 2, is that the games are too similar. And yes, without a doubt, the mechanics are incredibly samey. But each game, particularly Brotherhood, all made minor improvements to their sequel, so would you say that the Halo games are too similar? Would you say that about The Witcher? Brotherhood took all of the foundations laid in AC2, the origins of Ezio, the combat, the world building, the stealth, the Brotherhood, and improved on it in almost every way. Yes, granted, it is now dated, it is almost 15 years old after all, but it's actually aged incredibly well in my opinion, especially from a gameplay perspective. Before I started replaying Brotherhood, I really did wonder whether this game was going to feel better due to nostalgia and that classic old man response of, "Things were better in my day." But with Brotherhood, it genuinely was. Sure, there are a few minor issues, but when you judge everything together, it's difficult to think of an Assassin's Creed experience that is stronger overall. Our world is beautiful, iconic and detailed, really aiding all of our gameplay to be super enjoyable. Our story is dependable with a great villain, our protagonist is at his finest, and it has a really great modern day segment that actually ties into the whole story. The combat is super fun and fluid, the stealth is pretty satisfying, the parkour really decent too, and we have the entire new usable Brotherhood assassins, adding a whole new dimension to the game. In fact, the only Assassin's Creed game which I think matches Brotherhood's brilliance is Black Flag, and you can check out that review or others in my next video. I will catch you legends in the next one. Until then.